From the New American's Cold Case Division, this is the Daniel Natal Show. This presentation is just a postscript to a previous episode entitled The Psychology of Totalitarianism. In that episode, I covered Matthias Desmet's observation that what society was undergoing was a phenomenon called mass formation psychosis. Just as a reminder of what mass formation psychosis is, here's an interview with Desmet and James Corbett.
And I would suggest that perhaps the easiest way to begin broaching this conversation is from the introduction to your book, where you noted that dictatorships are based on a primitive psychological mechanism, namely on the creation of a climate of fear amongst the population based on the brutal potential of the dictatorial regime. Totalitarianism, on the other hand, has its roots in the insidious psychological process of mass formation. And you go on to say that mass formation is, in essence, a kind of group hypnosis that destroys individuals' ethical self-awareness and robs them of their ability to think critically. All right, so I'm getting the impression from this is some sort of psychological social phenomenon, but perhaps you can expand on that. How would you frame mass formation for people who've never heard that term before?
Yes, it's indeed crucial to understand what mass formation is if you want to understand the essence of totalitarianism. But as you said, as you just quoted from the book, people often mix up classical dictatorship with totalitarianism. And it's as I think you're witnessing now, the emergence of a new kind of totalitarianism, not the fascist or not the communist totalitarianism, but the technocratic totalitarianism, which is at the same time similar and different from fascist and communist totalitarianism. But as I think you witness the emergence of a new totalitarianism now, I think it's really crucial to understand what mass formation is and to be aware of how a totalitarian state emerges in a society. And as you mentioned already, a mass formation is a typical kind of group formation, which has a very specific characteristic impact on individual mental functioning. One of the most remarkable effects of mass formation on individual psychological functioning is that it makes people radically incapable of taking a critical distance from what the group believes in. So once people are in the grip of this process of mass formation, they will typically become blind for the absurd characteristics of the groupthink, of what the group believes in.
Why I'm returning to the subject is that I was recently reading a book on workplace bullying called Overcoming Mobbing. In it, it describes how people programmed by the hive mind gang up and bully a person to make him quit his job. In reading it, it reminded me of how big tech and mass media combine to encourage people to cyberbully President Trump. In the book, we read, mobbing victims are scapegoats for larger organizational problems, the consequences of which are blamed on the mobbing victim. It goes on to ask, who is likely to get mobbed? In the United States and the Western world more generally, we tend to place the blame on individuals rather than on groups or larger contexts when bad things happen. We routinely explain negative outcomes by looking for the bad apple in the barrel. We regularly hear comments like, someone's going to pay for this. Someone must be held accountable. Our first and strongest impulse when looking for explanations for why something happened that we don't like is to focus on individually based explanations, especially on personality factors. The impulse is so strong and so erroneously biased that social psychologists have a name for it. They call it fundamental attribution error. This bias describes how people overemphasize individually based explanations for events and situations and underemphasize group, organizational, and contextual explanations. So when someone becomes a victim of workplace mobbing and loses his job by being fired or quitting, the fundamental attribution error leads people to explain what happened by looking for something wrong in the individual, rather than by looking for problems at the organizational and contextual level. Those two assertions intrigued me, namely, that people will ignore the system and falsely reprobate an individual. Secondly, that they'll concentrate less on substance than on personality. Notice how when Trump was attacked, it was never for his policies, but for his personality traits. He was the mango messiah, the Cheeto god. They made fun of his hair, the way he spoke, what his personal quirks were, but it was very seldom related to his actual job performance. The book adds, Employees are more likely to be mobbed who challenge organizational dynamics or organizational policies and procedures rather than people who don't speak out. They are also workers who expose corruption and/or wrongdoing or who speak out in the public interest. When Trump complained about the system, about globalization, a two-tier criminal justice system, about the swamp, he became the perfect mobbing patsy. The book says that victims are almost never judged on their job performance, which is usually exemplary. Not able to go after that, they concentrate on petty personality traits. Note the phenomenon, for instance, of how, when not told that a policy was Trump's, college students liked them. In fact, Trump's policies, when his name was removed from them, had an unheard of 80% popularity rate. But when mass formation psychosis kicks in, people were blinded to substance. See here.
Well, it turns out college students love President Trump's policies when they're told the policies belong to presumptive Democrat presidential nominee Joe Biden. One America's James LaRosa has more on the story.
College students applaud President Trump's platforms only when they are told they are Joe Biden's. In various interviews on Wednesday, campus reform correspondent Eduardo Narrett went around asking college students on what they thought about Biden's proposals for college individuals. What the students were not told, however, is the policies actually belonged to President Trump.
All right, so Joe Biden came out with a proposal over the weekend to help people during the coronavirus. One, deferring payments on student loans. So if you have student loans, you don't have to be making those payments right now. And then he also proposed a payroll tax cut so people would get a little bit more money in their paycheck.
Narrett then asked for their feedback regarding the policies and received overwhelming positive reactions from the young adults. One of the individuals even said she hoped the proposals were not just empty promises by Biden.
But I think student loans, like if I had student loans and I was not having to pay them, that would help me a lot.
So we're nursing students, so we have a lot of loans. The interest part of it, it does help. Exactly. It truly does help.
Did you say Joe Biden or Donald Trump?
Biden.
Biden, okay. I think the student loans, yes, it's a good thing.
The book has a passage that says when a lot of people in the workplace are saying the same thing about someone else, it is a telltale sign of workplace mob formation. This term, workplace mob formation, is just the corporate term for Desmet's phrase of mass formation psychosis, or in common parlance, Trump derangement syndrome. It's just instructive that as big tech claimed to be against cyberbullying and online harassment, they weaponized it on steroids when the target was an outsider who came in to drain the swamp. And we're still seeing the mobbing mentality in play when the FBI continued to harass Trump and demands that the rest of us cyberbully what they perceive to be a threat to the gravy train of Washington graft and corruption. The New American Magazine is guided by our support for the U.S. Constitution and the principles upon which that document is based. We want to restore and retain the values and vision that made America great, limited government under the Constitution, the freedoms that our Constitution guarantees, and the personal responsibility a free people must exercise to stay free. To learn more, subscribe to our magazine, visit thenewamerican.com.